Hey, welcome back to Mental Health Monday. I do hope you're well. Thank you so much for checking out this podcast feed. As ever, it's so important to be having conversations about mental health, but you'll have noticed we've had a slight hiatus on the feed in the last few weeks, and that's for a really important reason, because after 350 episodes of Mental Health Monday, there was a big project that I wanted to work on that was going to take up quite a lot of my time, and I think and I hope that over the next 30 minutes or so, you're going to get a real sense that I hope that time was really well spent. You're about to hear Lost Souls, a documentary I've been working on for a number of months, and it charts my investigation into the fate of Britain's asylum graves, the mental health patients and mentally ill people who lived and died in asylums. What happened to their bodies after they died? What happened then? And what's still happening to them now? There's big questions to answer, I hope, as a result of this investigation, and I hope it opens a number of doors for the future, not just to bring dignity back to those people who have suffered, but also to reset our relationship as a nation with mental health. I'm Mick Coyle, and this is Lost Souls. That's definitely the place. Apparently there's a sign somewhere here. Now let me just cross over and try a bit further down. There's a sign, private property, keep out. I mean, you could scramble across that broken fence, but it's pretty clear there's no proper entrance. Okay, so what I'm looking for here is evidence that there are 9,000 people buried in this woodland in front of me. 9,000 people, and I can't even get in. This plot is about 70 metres long and about 30 metres deep, and I'm just outside Epsom in Surrey. It's a cemetery that I'm looking at, but it's not like the sort of cemetery you'd get in your regular churchyard, because these are the graves of people who died in mental health asylums. And I find myself here because I'm investigating what is happening to the graves of hundreds of thousands of people who lived in asylums across the country. And increasingly, what I'm finding are that these people, these graves, are being forgotten, abandoned, and even, in this case, sold off. So join me as I go in search of Britain's lost souls.
It's a shame in every sense of shame.
The hospitals were doing what they saw as best. It wasn't good enough.
He said, you stood on an owl.
Just don't know why people aren't talking about it. It's like the biggest secret in the world, and it's the greatest insult.
You don't now just neglect that cemetery, treat it with contempt, let it overgrow.
Land's valuable. It gets sold.
In death, she's being disrespected as well as she was in life.
These people existed, and they may have existed in your family. They didn't do anything wrong. Read their story, read it and weep.
I'll be back in Surrey later, but first, in my search for these lost souls, I'm at a mental health hospital outside Warrington, meeting Michael Krilly.
How are you doing?
How are you, sir?
Good to see you.
So me and Michael first met when he was a guest on the Mental Health Monday podcast that I've been doing since 2017. His job is all about mental health and social inclusion, and this is the first mental health cemetery that I've visited.
How's tricks?
Really good, really good.
Excellent. Picked a nice day for this.
Absolutely. Well, I'm intrigued, and I'm already seeing a few signs. In memory of patients of Winnick and Newchurch hospitals. You showed me a graveyard, Michael.
I am, Nick. Just wanted to show you this place. It's 2,010 souls that were laid to rest between 1901 and 1979 during the operations of those hospitals, and this is where they were buried if they died in the care of the hospital.
So I can see the sign here. They're separated as Church of England graves and Roman Catholic graves. Now, if this was, if this was a normal cemetery, I'd be looking at 2,000 headstones here. That's not what I'm seeing.
That's not what you're seeing. But effectively, these were people who perhaps were unclaimed by families. So it was more or less what you would maybe describe as a pauper's grave. But you've substantially got row upon row upon row of graves. So you can see sort of narrow lines where that's the sort of outline where the rows and plots would be. My sense is that there are some examples of these being well cared for and well maintained, but probably some examples where, particularly when the hospitals moved away, they've probably just been left to go to rack and ruin.
And here for me is the moment that things change, because I can see in Michael's eyes that the idea that there are potentially thousands of unmarked graves lying forgotten across the country, not being looked after and in genuine danger of being lost forever, is lying heavily on his mind.
I feel quite emotional thinking about the fact that 2,010 people lie here substantially unnamed, maybe unclaimed. And I think actually that's probably a story that's replicated up and down the country, that's been part of the story of mental health. And that's a challenge to me. It leaves me feeling uneasy, like there's something we can do better for them. And actually, I think we need to tell the story for us too, in terms of how we understand mental health. You know, this is not so long ago. This is really recent. Things were happening to people because of their mental health that were being shunted away and hidden. I think we've got to bring that out into the open. It doesn't feel right to leave the story untold.
Right, so here's the background bit. Back in the Victorian era, there are about 150 so-called lunatic asylums built across Britain to house people with mental health problems who suffered mental illness, but also a host of other things. These sites were huge, a small town in their own right. Now, when these patients died, if no one collected them and they had no money, they'd be buried in what were called pauper lunatic graves. Now, often people weren't collected because to have someone in the asylum carried stigma and shame locally. These graves were often 3 to 4 deep, but sometimes 6 people were placed in each plot. Now, each of these plots was given a grave marker so you could track who was buried there, but unlike graveyards with headstones, there were no names. An eternity of anonymity awaited those in these sites.
Once they were in the ground, they were not given a name. They were not given a marker with a name on it. That's an absolute disgrace.
Now, this guy really knows his stuff. Kevin Macdonald. I was told he was the man to speak to about the fate of Britain's pauper lunatics, these lost souls. And it was clear from our very first chat that even as an amateur researcher, this was something he was incredibly passionate about.
It's a huge wrong that's been done to hundreds of thousands of people. Nobody knows about it. It's wrong on every level. So I think we should bring it out into the public.
Kevin's been looking at grave sites across the country for years, and he's mortified by what he's finding. A real sense that, as I feared, they're simply being forgotten, they're being abandoned, neglected, or sometimes even hide anonymously in plain sight in the middle of our communities.
It's a shame in every sense of shame. It's a shame for the people that are buried in the ground who have been forgotten, written out of the family history, have been made non-people, non-existent in their own family stories. All these cemeteries are driven past, walked over every day with people not realising what they're walking on, what they're walking next to. And they should. Kevin's been looking into the issue for years now. I had to ask him how many people did he think could be in these so-called pauper lunatic graves. How many lost souls am I looking for? I was staggered by his response. There'd be probably north of 300,000 people buried like this, many of them forgotten in life and certainly forgotten in death. So the numbers are very, 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 very big. It's hard not to get caught up in Kevin's passion for this subject. How have we as a country let things get this bad? Let me fire up the laptop. Okay, so there's a great website that's called County Asylums that lists around 140 sites thereabouts across the country. Now, when you click through on each one, you can see pictures of these huge towns. These asylum sites were absolutely massive. And then what they look like now, some have been demolished, some have been turned into housing. Now, in the burials section, they've got a cross-referenced old OS map with the burial sites
and then they're cross-referenced with the asylum sites on Google Maps, and when you click through, you can see what's become of them. Oh, wow. So look at this. So what I'm looking now is the modern-day field where the burial site was. There's, at the bottom corner, a new build estate across the road. On the ground, though, itself, from space, you can actually make out the shape of every single burial plot there. There's like a good few hundred there. If you click onto Street View, I mean, there's nothing to suggest that it's even there. It's unbelievable. Another one here looks a bit like a sad plot of land. You've got the perimeter wall, not in the best of states, no signage. The grass is hardly being tended to. But when you can click on the old OS map, cemetery. I mean, there is no way that you would let like a church or a municipal cemetery look like that. This one, I mean, wow. It's literally got a children's play area on top of it. This was a mental health gravesite, an asylum gravesite. Now, it's literally got a basketball court on it. And I've been told about the one in Wales. Yeah, this one, it just looks a bit sad now. It was once a grand old building and estate. The burial plot has been left to overgrow. I can see it behind the chapel there. The chapel itself is being swallowed by the woodland. Now, when you click on the information there, there's 1,500 people in there. That just shows how big an issue this is. Yeah, I mean, some of these sites see the grass cut every now and then, but, you know, is that the dignity that these people deserve under a basketball court?
Oh, thank you for coming all the way over here.
Well, it was
All the way
a
from
pleasure.
north of Manchester.
So let me introduce you now to Dr. Cla Hilton, who I'm meeting in London. She's the resident historian for the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and I come down to their HQ to find out more about her work. Now, she specialises in the early 20th century, and I've read some of her papers online. She's in the perfect position to give me the lowdown on what was happening at these asylums.
At that time, if anybody's behaviour was disturbed, they'd be admitted to a mental hospital. So, unfortunately, you had people with pneumonia causing them delirium, with abnormalities of blood sugar, with terminal illnesses, of cancer, and so on, all sorts of things. And many would have only been in hospital a matter of days or weeks before they died. In many ways, the hospitals were doing what they saw as best. It often wasn't best. It wasn't good enough. But some of today's practices also aren't good enough.
So what's interesting here is that Claire says regardless of why they were there, at the point of burial, there was a process of ceremony, of respect for a person's religion, which begs the question, what's been allowed to happen in the time since? Some of these sites in that period of time have been sold off. They've been built over. They've been deconsecrated and left. Some have been abandoned, neglected. The markers taken. The sites essentially anonymised as well. What's your understanding of what's happened to those sites in that next 100 years, 125 years?
It's not something you can be absolutely general about. Land's valuable. It gets sold, as have the hospital buildings, as has the rural estate and the farms which often surrounded the buildings. I haven't been to all the hospitals, but I've been to a number of them. Some today are very, very overgrown. Some have been made into gardens or small parks. To me, it comes across as slightly strange to see people doing all their jogging and their exercise round the paths. In some places as well, they've put up bigger memorials. What the Maidstone one has is dignified signage, telling people where they can find out more if they believe there's somebody they know or their ancestor who was buried there. But to get people engaging and thinking about what this country and society and the public did that's good as well as what was bad.
The grave sites that Claire has visited tell 1,000 stories, but no surprises here. A theme emerges that many are at risk of being forgotten.
A lot of the places where the old mental hospitals have been changed into housing have had their names changed. You don't get any signage as to what the place was before in nature. Some you do. And trying to avoid anything related to the mental hospitals. And I actually think that adds stigma and it adds discrimination of people with any sort of mental concerns today, because all they see is it may be suspicious that this was once a mental hospital or use some other term for it. And I think better recognition of our past and those people would actually help with addressing issues around stigma today.
A serious point from Claire now is that this isn't just about history, although she is a historian. It's about what society values, what we deem to be important, and what we take from our past and project into our future.
I would be wanting to really encourage more to be done. It's good for their memory and it's good for your soul.
So a short hop out of central London has me back at Horton Cemetery in Surrey, and there's still no way in. What's more, the memorial that was placed here on the roadside as a way of the community trying to recognise its past now lies broken on the floor after a car hit it. There's some symbolism there about what's happening here. Now, as I mentioned before, this graveyard has around 9,000 bodies in it because the cluster of local asylums buried all their so-called pauper lunatics here. That practice stopped around the middle of the last century, and by the early 1980s, the land was sold. Here it stands. 40 years of trees, plants, scrub have taken over the site. There's no official access and no means for anyone to pay their respects here. Is it Francesca? Yeah, Nick. Good to meet you.
My name is Francesca and I'm from Watford, Hertfordshire. A few years ago I did a search on Ancestry to find out where my great-grandmother was because she was a family secret, and I found out that she had been admitted to the West Park Hospital because she was struggling with her mental health, and I believe she's buried here because it says so on her death certificate.
I've just shown Francesca what's happened to this burial plot. She's visiting here for the very first time. Her great-grandmother, Hilda Nichols, is somewhere beyond that fence. Francesca's been looking into her history.
I believe she was a neurodivergent woman who was suffering from trauma, and that's how she ended up in the hospital. And she was a problem, and they just hid her away, and we don't have any belongings for her at all. So this cemetery is important to me because I feel connected, because I feel like I found her. And I've never been here before, and I completely am disgusted by what I see because you can't get in there. There's beautiful scenery around here, and they have just let this happen to a place where there is 9,000 people buried. And also this is sacred ground and it doesn't look very sacred.
Now, Francesca's great-grandmother was here for just 2 years before she died, and I sense a real disappointment and sadness that this has become Hilda's last resting place.
It was very difficult to walk down to this area. You wouldn't know it's a cemetery. I don't understand it. This is like the biggest secret in the world for this country, and it's the greatest insult. And I was wondering, what could I do? And I thought, well, when you approached me and said, would you like to speak about it? I thought, well, that's what I can do, because my family have kept her a secret for years because that's what we were told to do. And I'm the first person that's come here to sort of like acknowledge her existence, because she was sent here with nothing. And I just don't know how there isn't a public inquiry and there isn't a formal apology about this, because I do feel like it's a cover-up. It's literally a cover-up. Everything's overgrown. You don't even know something's in there.
Francesca found out about this place during an online search about her family tree. Now she's here, she's even more convinced that she wants to know more about what happened here and what's been allowed to happen since.
Her whole life she was made to feel like to be ashamed of and to be hidden away, and then ultimately that's how she died, hidden away, and then she's been buried in a place like this, and then this has gone into disrepair. It's just like in death she's being disrespected as well as she was in life.
Well, obviously take up no more of your time in terms of the questions. Do you think you'll have a little private moment to yourself to have a little chat with Hilda about?
It's funny because I was doing that on the journey here because like what I said to her was, I remember you and I've come here to represent you. I hope you don't mind, and I won't forget you because everybody else did. But I am not forgetting her, and I talk about her, and it gives me comfort. But yeah, I wish I could have done more. But I feel like I'm representing her now, and I hope she can see me doing that because it does matter. She was important.
Well, I've reached out to contact the landowner to find out about his plans for this site for the future, and currently he appears not to be interested in engaging. But I can speak with the Friends of Horton Cemetery, who've spent decades trying to get this site back into the community hands, so they can turn this woodland scrub into a place that offers dignity to those interred here. So just jumping on a call with Lionel Blackman from Friends of Horton Cemetery. He's campaigning to get the graveyard out of private hands and give them back to the community.
I mean, honestly, that has to be a historic wrong if your decision is, let's just sell this plot of land of 9,000 patients to a property speculator. If it was your mother, your grandmother, or indeed your son or daughter, and then where they're buried is just going to be ignored, having been sold to a property speculator, how would you feel?
Now, Lionel's been telling me he thinks it's appalling that this situation even exists. He's engaging with the local community with a series of projects to raise awareness, help families learn more about what's currently happening to their relatives. But driving him on more than ever is the fact that this land is inaccessible for those who want to grieve and pay their respects there.
You don't now just neglect that cemetery, treat it with contempt, let it overgrow, not allow relatives to visit because it's trespass. I think that's, for me, is the bottom line of this.
And like Francesca, Dr. Claire and Kevin before him, there's a real sense that taking action on this will go some way to taking on the issue of mental health stigma today.
If we can demonstrate respect for those who are buried, I think it makes a major contribution to the acceptance and respect and recognition for those living who are suffering from a mental condition.
So let's recap where I'm at. Mental health asylums buried their dead in pauper lunatic graves if they couldn't afford a private burial. A rough estimate means we could be talking 250,000 graves at least across Britain. No names. And the numbered markers used to identify the grave plots are now being lost, stolen, or I've even heard they've been melted down for their metal content. The land they were on, in many cases, no longer houses a hospital, and that means these sites can often sit in plain sight in the heart of communities. And the fate of these sites and what's happening to them now is why I started this investigation in the first place. There must be another way.
This place was derelict, overgrown, being misused, and we've got it back looking somewhat like. Yeah, it's a good feeling.
Now, this is such a breath of fresh air. I'm at Hyroid Cemetery in West Yorkshire with Alan, one of the volunteers who brought this place back to life.
A year, we came up every Saturday. It got us out of the house. It got something done for the community. And we got to go for a pint at the end of the day.
Did you feel, because you knew there was a family connection with the site, that you were actually giving something back to not just the community, but also to your own family?
Yes, certainly. My mum, she was an only one. And I did this for her.
Alan's really emotional about this place, as you can tell, and the impact he and a band of local volunteers has had on it is profound. Where once it was overgrown, it's now a memorial garden, lush planting borders, and most importantly, clear signage that this is a site of socially important history.
The amount of sites up and down the country that must end up like Hyroid Cemetery did, it's a good thing if we can get them back looking something decent that are centres of local vandals and what have you.
the chapel here, it's only small. It had a tree growing through the middle of it before Alan got to work. Now it acts as a mini museum featuring pictures of those who lived in the asylum and images from the asylum of when it was in use. Even better, just outside, there's a map of the site here, highlighting where all the graves were, and a book inside the chapel that lets you identify exactly where people are buried. And for Alan, through the help of a local researcher and author, he was able to find the exact spot that his great-grandmother, Cicely Sedgwick, was laid to rest.
Very emotive to delve into the background and find out how she stayed here, for how long. Mark Davis, who's done all the website for the Hyroids, contacted me one particular day. He said, "Alan, we've got some information for you about your gran, where she's buried." Right. And he brought me, I met him at the cemetery, and we walked out, and he suddenly stopped. I said, "Okay then, Mark, where is she?" He said, "You stood on her. You stood on her now." Yeah, amazing.
What was it like getting that connection back?
It was great to put a location to her last burial place. Amazing. Very emotional, as you can most probably hear.
It's a really special place here because we've got the chapel, which is a real centre where there's lots of educational information. There's the boards where you can actually see the grave layout themselves. But also there's, cared for and looked after flowers. They're blooming springtime as we head into summer. And this is a nice place to be.
It's been amazing, and I really enjoyed doing it. A very pleasant year out of my life, giving something back. Enjoyed it immensely.
What is it, do you think, that makes you feel so emotional about it?
It's going to be here now for another good few years, in this condition, I hope. And long may it continue.
Okay, I'm just trying to get my head around everything that I've found out as part of this investigation. So I'm returning to Winnick Hospital, where I first met Michael Krilly, and I saw my first pauper lunatic grave site, this site here. Now, what's interesting here is that the site was divided up between Roman Catholic graves and Church of England graves, and there's very few names. But what I found is that this is a place of peace and tranquility, and I guess that's because the people who are running this site still have a vested interest in it, to draw the link between what happened in the old asylum and maybe what's happening today in this new facility. I'm keen to ask Michael how else they honour people from the past in the present, and maybe what other sites could learn from places like this and Hyroids. Michael, good to see you again.
You too, Mick. Welcome back.
I'll tell you what, I think there's a couple of plaques and things have gone up since we were last here, and the place is looking well looked after. That's great to see, because in the last few months, Michael, I've seen some real sites, and actually inspired by the conversation that we had here, to go and see what some of these sites were like. And in some cases they've been sold off, they're forgotten, there's a private, you can't go in there at all, and it's simply awful. I've spoken to the families who tell me, where is the dignity that allows someone to come into a space like that, to find out about their loved one, to have a right to remember them, but also for those people to have a right to be remembered.
I think it's that fact that there's 2,010 people who were laid to rest here. What's their story? They will have been men and women like the rest of us, and their stories would have been very, very different today if mental health had been understood in a different way.
And I found myself, Michael, on this mission, if you like, to bring this story out into the open, and to highlight sites like this, and to highlight the fact that many of these sites, these unmarked graves are out there with many thousands of people whose stories are very seriously at risk of being forgotten. Why is it important, do you think, that we have this conversation?
It's important because actually nobody is nameless. Everybody has a name, everybody has a story, they all have a human dignity. And we belong to each other, they're part of us, they're part of our present understanding. How we live our lives today is shaped by the people who've gone before us, and we need to learn from our history, and their lives are as valuable as any other life. Just because they happen to have a mental health issue doesn't make them any less valuable, and we need to be reminded of the value of life now more than ever.
So, where do we go from here? No one's suggesting that we find space and funding for more than 250,000 new headstones for every person who died, but dignity and acknowledgement needs to be returned to these grave sites. Kevin Macdonald told me the local community can play a huge part in that.
Every single one of these burial grounds needs a memorial. It doesn't have to be 20 feet tall, to say how many people are buried there, where they came from, and where the public can go to read their stories.
And for those sites that are lost, sold, forgotten, well, for me, it's about memory. A new national memorial for those buried in pauper graves. That'd be a start, wouldn't it? We all have a right to remember them, but we also have a right to be remembered. Just because someone had mental health problems doesn't mean they're any less of a human being. That's a message that's as relevant now as it was then. But before I go, I wanted to leave you with something. A poem written by Alan, who we met up in Yorkshire. It was inspired by his great-great-grandmother and those who lay in similar pauper lunatic graves. Reflections of those questions and thoughts that came to his mind as he toiled those long hours returning Hyroid Cemetery and the lost souls to the light.
The poem's called Row 9, Grave 28. Yeah.
When you're ready.
Right. At rest, they all lie together. Their earthly days now done. Strangers beside one another, but buried together as one. Tormented poor souls now united, all by the finger of fate. Eternity waits for the foursome by the way of the old chapel gate. Unclaimed by the families they came from, life's journey is near to its end. Now awaits the attendant gravedigger, the last 6 foot is duty to send. Did their paths ever cross up at Hyroids? Did ever they share just one word? Plaintive voices, were they ever noticed? Plaintive voices, were they ever heard? 4 lives from out of so many, Gertrude, Margaret and Dan, strangers lying so together, with Cicely, my grandmother's gran.
Lost Souls was presented and produced by Mick Coyle for Bauer Media Audio.